Hello, this is Mark Anderson coming to you from outside Boston, Mass. in the USA. That's Massachusetts. Sorry, we say it shorthand here. Really happy to be invited to the Adelaide Office 365 user group. I've been recording this ahead of time because I realized that the time that I would need to be awake and alive was not all that conducive to me thinking. It would be about 2:30 in the morning for me. So I'm going to record this this little session, and hopefully it will give you some things to think about. I mean, honestly, I wish I were in Adelaide instead of here, but we're not allowed to leave our country with this coronavirus stuff. So hopefully this will do. None of us are traveling these days, but we can still connect via the interwebs. I'm going to take my picture off of the screen so that we can just focus on the slides and the demo and stuff, but I did want to say hello, and coming from you from our late summer, early September for us is just starting to get a little crisp with fall. The weather's getting a little cooler, but we've had a great summer here. Bit of a dry summer, unfortunately, not enough rain, but as you can tell, I like to go to the beach, so that was a good thing for me. But shall we move along? So I'd like to talk to you today about information architecture provisioning, and there are three sort of options that we have. They're not all equal, nor do I feel the same way about all of them, as it will come out as I start talking about them. We have the old content type hub, which has been around since SharePoint 2010 and has served a great purpose over time, but it's not necessarily the best thing in the world anymore. Then we have site designs, and we have P&P provisioning templates. And I'll talk a bit about the pros and cons of each. First, a little bit about me. I've been running a little company up here in the Boston area called Symbraxis Consulting for about 13 years now. I started it with a buddy of mine, and it was for a long time. After the first couple of years, it was just me, and then we've had some great people join the company. We're up to 6 people now. And 3 of us are SharePoint MVPs, or Office Apps and Services MVPs, me, myself, and Julie Turner and Todd Clint. And then rounding out the rest of the roster is Mike Gil-Ronan, Emily Mancini, and Derek Cash-Peterson. Really a great bunch of people. Really enjoy working with them. I'm an old guy. I've been doing work in the sort of technology space, I guess I would say, for many, many years, over 35. I guess it's getting close to 40 at this point. I've been a consultant, but I've also had some real jobs. I ran the delivery business systems for an office supply company, retail company called Staples here in the U.S. I think they may have made it down to Australia at one point. And so I sort of know what it's like to be in the trenches, but I also know what it's like to see lots and lots of companies in many, many, many industries over the last 35 or 40 years and see what works well and what doesn't work well. I love to solve problems. I'm an implementer. I like to look at it at a business problem or a technical problem and come up with a solution that is perhaps not the most elegant, but something that's going to work the best for the people who are going to use it. It's really going to solve the problem and hopefully be enjoyable enough, and yes, technology can be fun, to make people want to use it. The whole goal here is to make people's jobs easier, or at least a little bit more interesting, rather than trying to impose a lot of technical solutions on people that get in the way of them being productive. Seems really, really obvious, but when you're out there looking at what people are doing in the real world, you don't always see that that's what's happening. You see a lot of solutions that are built with very little understanding of what's going to get people to use them. The sort of concept of user experience is not often thought about enough. So I like to try to bring all of those different mindsets to the things that I build. I wrote a little library called SP Services years ago, and I'm still resting on my laurels for that. I was one of the first people to look at client-side programming as a good thing to do around the SharePoint platform all the way back to SharePoint 2007. SP Services wrapped the ASMX or SOAP endpoints. Sorry if I'm saying a lot. And made them easier to consume, made it easier to write solutions with them. I'm the administrator of a PNP repo called Microsoft 365 Community Docs, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more in a minute. I've been an MVP for about 10 years. Really am so excited, really all the time, to be a member of that group of people. They're just some of the best people I've worked with in over the years. You know, the crew of MVPs is almost entirely made up of people who really just want this entire community to succeed. And we get to hang out together, less so this year, but learning from each other and helping others out. And it's just incredibly rewarding. And I'm a member of the PNP Patterns and Practices team, working with Vesa Javonen, which is also a great honor. My sort of offering in the PNP world is the Microsoft 365 Community Docs, and I did want to take a second to sort of advertise that. The link there is on the right side, and you see the homepage there. This is a set of documents that are curated underneath the docs.microsoft.com umbrella. So Microsoft actually gave us a little bit of real estate inside their Docs platform to publish community-based or community-driven and created content. We've got about 50 articles at this point, and they're starting to break into some sections, and you can see some of them here on the screen. There's more, so please go visit the repo and scroll down. We're housing the maturity model from Microsoft 365, which is building on the great work of Sadie Van Buren about 10 years ago for the SharePoint maturity model. And we're bringing that up to sort of rev for the Microsoft 365 world. And we take sort of the approach of everything from the very basics. We have a glossary just to look up terms that you might not understand. There are a lot of acronyms in our industry. They're not all covered in there, but we'd love to try and get as much in there as possible. So just definitions of words, if you will, to some really basic things like what are site columns, what are content types, which I'm going to talk about in this session. And then a lot of other things, some great articles about security, some great articles about effective communication, information architecture, lots of things that might be helpful for you. The great thing about these articles is that they've all been written by people out here in the community. They're based on what actually works, what we've learned as being practitioners of what we do, as opposed to the way Microsoft sees that we should be using their tools. So it's a different slant, and I'm hoping that you'll find something valuable for yourselves in there. If you'd like to be a contributor, please do get in touch either with me or if you go to the PNP general site, you can see some links to help you sort of get in there and start to either suggest articles or write articles of your own. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so let's get on to the sort of the main show here. Information architecture, when we're talking about in the terms of SharePoint and even in Microsoft 365 on a broader level, all of these blue blocks and the red blocks have something to do with what I think of information architecture in SharePoint. All of these things are critical to get right, at least to some degree, in order to build a successful set of solutions for your organization. What I'm going to talk about in this session, though, is really more focused on site columns and content types, because when we're working in the modern world, we need a consistent way to deploy content types to specific sites in our tenant in order to help bring some consistency and repeatability to the content that we store in our tenant. I probably will touch a bit on some of the other things that are on this slide. Lists and libraries obviously are very important because we enable content types on them. But really the goal here is to talk more about what we need to set up for the information architecture in order to be able to bring some consistency to content and what the best mechanisms are to do that. As I mentioned on the title slide, there are three sort of main ways to do this. There's probably a fourth one, which is roll your own. which is certainly an option that you have. You can write a lot of PowerShell to sort of roll your own mechanisms to do this, and I've done that in the past. But I see that the capabilities that are available that are more organized and a little bit better thought out as being these three. So the content type hub, as I mentioned earlier, has been around since SharePoint 2010. It's been there forever. It just works. The people who use it may argue with that, but in actuality, the way it works is we build our site columns, we build our content types in the content type hub, and then we publish that content type. The reason that people get frustrated with it is that publishing process can take anywhere from a few seconds to days. And so that's one of the cons, is the publishing is a black box and it's very unpredictable. We just don't know when that publishing process is going to be successful. When it happens in a second or two, we're incredibly happy. When it takes something like 2 or 3 days, we're not. The other nice thing about one of the other pros for the content type hub is it has a UI that is a classic SharePoint team site. And all we have to do is go in and build our site columns and content types like we would in any other site in a classic SharePoint farm or an older classic site in SharePoint Online. And we can build out that part of our information architecture without having to write any code whatsoever. It's all user interface driven. It makes total sense to people who have that sort of library science kind of mindset, people who understand that way of thinking about information architecture. And it's been pretty much constant for a really long time, so it's very familiar. Another con, though, is that it really only helps with content types and thus site columns. Content types are made up of site columns and then have other special qualities. So we can't go any further than that. The content type hub does that for us, but it doesn't do any more. The other downside of the content type hub is that the syndication, the publishing mechanism that content type hub has within it, means that the syndication, the publishing process, pushes those content types to every site in our tenant. That made a lot of sense when we used to have sort of monolithic big pyramids of sites and subsites that made up maybe our intranet. We might have an intranet homepage and then maybe 5 or 6 department sites, and then below that some sub-department sites and things like that. And so having the same content types across all of those sites and subsites might not be a bad thing. But now that we're in a very flat, a very different kind of topology with modern SharePoint, that really isn't all that helpful. If I have a benefits document as a content type, and that obviously makes some good sense in human resources, but it doesn't make any sense in a finance site or in a project site where we're working on the actual work of our organization. So that is definitely a con at this point. The two other things on this slide, site designs and PnP provisioning templates, are much, much more modern. Site designs came out about 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. It could have been 3. I'm not all that clear on it, but it doesn't matter that much. It's been a couple of years. And one of the nice things about site designs is we can take a prototypical site and export the information architecture from it, and then sort of bundle that together. And I'm going to go through a demo of all of this to show how it works. And then site owners can apply that site design directly from the UI. So again, we're giving the people who might want to apply this repeatable set of our information architecture a way to do so straight in the UI, which is always a plus. Microsoft likes to introduce things that require a lot of PowerShell coding in the initial days, and I'm always sort of happier when they build a UI for something, and site designs do have that. You can go through some flexible use cases. So for instance, you might have a site design for project sites, or a site design for, if you're a law firm, maybe the Matter sites. You can also provision content that goes into lists and libraries. So for instance, you might pre-populate some lists or libraries with content that should be there to start off that particular site design. You can also try and think about ways to manage lifecycle with site design. You know, you have might have a site design that's an initial project kickoff, and then another that's at phase 2, and another that's at phase 3 of the way you think of projects evolving, or matters evolving, or whatever other kind of site it is that you might have, because what your organization does is its primary work. Some of the cons to site designs is that it requires some coding knowledge. When you build a site design, you build a set of site scripts, and each of those site scripts is made up of JSON, JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation. It originally was a way to store data, and Microsoft and many other companies have started to use it as a way to encode things. It's a safer mechanism for encoding script-like activity because of some of the rules around the way JSON can be interpreted. And so you'll see it in a lot of cases in Microsoft land these days being used to drive the configuration of things. And then you need to understand at least enough PowerShell to export out the information architecture you've built in your prototypical site, bundle it together, you would bundle together a bunch of site scripts usually, and then deploy them as a site design. It's not that onerous set of PowerShell, but you do have to have that PowerShell knowledge. You can't work with pages in site designs, which is a real downside to it. It's one of the first things that most site designs with a small s and a small d end up wanting is a customized homepage. Let's at least stick a couple of web parts on there that we want to be consistent across all of the sites of a certain type. The other downside is that site design seems to have sort of just been sitting there. When I say in stasis, I mean that there's not been a lot of active development on site designs in the last year or two. There are a lot of bugs raised in the SP Dev docs. There are a lot of questions that have been asked, a lot of enhancements suggested, and we just don't see a lot of movement from that from Microsoft. There is a team at Microsoft that owns site designs, but we're just not seeing a lot of forward momentum. It gets some things done really well, but we're not seeing a lot of added capability, like working with pages would be something that would be nice to see. The third thing is P&P, which is, again, patterns and practices, provisioning templates. So P&P provisioning is often thought of as a way to for instance, maybe you have a dev, QA, and production site. And so to recreate the exact same structure and containers across those environments, P&P provisioning templates are great for that. But I think of them as a great way to also deploy information architecture across sites within a tenant. One of the benefits of the P&P provisioning templates is that it's actively being developed. There are members of the P&P team, Paolo Pagliorsi and others, who are regularly working on this capability. It's a capability that was needed by the community, so the community started building it. Though Microsoft certainly has a hand in it. It's got much wider coverage than site designs, and certainly than the content type hub, in that you can do more with it. I'll show some examples of that. And you can, one of the most important things is that you can work with pages. You can add web parts to pages, you can create new pages, but you can't do with site designs. What are the cons? Well, it requires even more coding knowledge. So we have a little bit of JSON that we can use there, and that's mainly to configure things. So I'll show you how that works. But P&P provisioning templates are really driven by XML. So that's another way to represent data. It's an older construct, extensible markup language, and it's a subset of XML. Is actually an example of a subset of XML is actually HTML, which is just a flavor of XML. And then you need PowerShell to both do the exports and do the deployment. A little bit more PowerShell, but not a lot more than you would need with site designs. You can only apply P&P provisioning templates with PowerShell. There is no UI for these things. I find myself teaching some, relatively unsavvy sort of site users or site owners how to run some PowerShell in order to apply some a provisioning template to a new site. It's not that onerous, but you do need to learn a little bit of PowerShell, nothing in the UI. And automating the application of these PnP provisioning templates is actually it's extra work. So for instance, you could set up an Azure function that you can call in order to call a PnP provisioning template based on an action. You might have a flow call that Azure function to trigger this thing. So you're ending up potentially building more scaffolding, but that also gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more options, a lot more ways to think about how you apply these things, and maybe give you a little bit more runway to come up with interesting new ideas. And one thing that I've forgotten to put on this slide is that with PnP provisioning templates, we can pass in values by passing in parameters to the template itself, and then the template makes those parameter substitutions. So for instance, you can set the title of the site by passing in a parameter for the title if you've got your template set up that way. So you have a lot more malleability on what the template can do than you do with site designs. So a little more comparison of the three ideas, again, sort of reiterating some of the things that I've already said. All three of these things will create site columns and content types, which is ostensibly what I'm talking about here today. But of course, if we're going to start implementing pieces of information architecture, we might want to use a tool set that will let us go to the next level if we need to. So for instance, if you were going to want to add or remove navigation elements, the content type hub is right out, but site designs and PnP provisioning templates can help you do that. Creating lists and libraries, again, the same. Those two would let you do this. Applying themes or branding or a logo, either site designs or PnP provisioning templates will do those. Adding solutions or add-ins. So if you have a solution deployed to the app catalog, you can attach that solution to a new site, either with site designs or provisioning templates. You can trigger a flow, so that's sort of an entry point into the do anything else, and you can do that from both of those mechanisms. Other site settings, like a regional setting, for instance, if you've got a global presence and you want to create your sites in a particular time zone, you can do that with either of those tools. You can add users to groups, which is nice. You can set some permissions, which is nice. Applying the mechanism through the UI is something the Content Type Hub does provide, as well as site designs, but not PnP provisioning templates. With the note that you could automate based on some user action in such a way that you don't really need a UI. The action that somebody takes by adding an item to a list, for example, might be something that triggers the PnP provisioning template to be applied to a site. But you can do a few more things with PnP provisioning templates than with site designs. You can create and configure pages, which again is very big. You can set property tag values. You can add files to the site. So for instance, if you have not necessarily templates, but you might have like maybe some sort of Excel model that you want people to start working with that's in a particular state, you could upload that to the site using the provisioning templates. And then there's a bunch more that provisioning templates does, and there will be more in the future. But again, I'm not focusing on everything it can do today. I'm more focusing on what we can do with some parts of the information architecture. Okay, so we've talked through some of the pros and cons, and we've looked at comparison of these different methods and why one might be better than another. Let's move right into some demos of how this stuff actually works. I've been using site designs and PnP provisioning templates for a little while now, and I have some approaches that I think are probably better practices, and they seem to work well for me to help my clients go from sort of the concept, sort of the ideation, into having something that's repeatable and reusable.
Okay, so here I am in my SharePoint Online tenant. This Marc is me. And I've got a site that I think of as my sort of prototypical site. This is where I'm going to start building out the information architecture that I want to apply to additional sites. In this case, I've called it information architecture. In reality, I usually end up doing this in the first instance of the site that we're going to sort of repeat. So for instance, the first project, the first matter, the first property, the first whatever it is that I'm going to stamp out a bunch of, I will create that first instance as the sort of prototypical thing. So it's not usually a generic name, it's usually something that we're actually going to use as a site going forward. But it's the site that we use to sort of experiment. We get our excuse me, we get our information architecture right, we export from here, and then we reapply to additional sites. So in this site, I've done nothing all that fancy. I've got a documents library, which comes obviously with the site when we create it, and I've got a property list. And in that property list, you'll notice that I've got a content type called inspection report. That's all there is to it. That's all that's going on here. If I look at this particular library, it's got one other content type applied to it. It's got document is the default, inspection report, and then floor plan. And each of those have slightly different metadata. An inspection has an inspection date and an inspection type, as you might expect. Those would go with the inspection report. And then a floor plan doesn't really have anything in particular special about it from a metadata standpoint, but we want to know that it's a floor plan. These were content types I actually built with a client in a client project, and they were a property management firm. So having a library called property with inspection reports and floor plans in it made sense. So I've sort of built out what the what the information architecture is that I want here. Those content types are defined not just on that list, or I'm sorry, library. When you write PowerShell a lot, you say list instead of library a lot of the time. But in actual fact, I've got those site columns and content type built at the site level, not at the list level. So here are my two site columns that I've created for this particular demo. You can ignore that one. And then my content types that are specific to this particular property site are right here. Floor plan, inspection report, and I actually have property photo, but I haven't added that to the library. So there's another thing that I've got going on here that I find to be a useful, better practice. I create so whatever the project name is, the client name, the particular part of the business I'm working with, whatever, something base document, and I inherit that just from document. So all that is a document by another name. And then for each sort of family of content types, I create another group. In this case, it's the demo property group. You notice the underscore at the beginning just so that it comes to the top of this giant list of stuff that I don't really want to look at. And I create a demo base property document. That inherits from the demo base document. Again, no special metadata. It's still just a document, but with a new name. These two base content types I will never actually enable on a list or library anywhere. I'll talk about why they're good in a second. So then I create things like floor plan, inspection report, and property photo by inheriting from that demo base property document. So this is the inspection report. I've added two site columns to it, and so that makes the inspection report special, right? It's got it's the content type name and a couple of extra pieces of metadata. Now the reason why demo base document and demo base property document are good is that if I decided I wanted to add a column to all three of these content types, I could just add it to the demo base property document, and then I'm done. It's very, very easy. If I decided I wanted to add, if I have lots and lots of content types across a bunch of groups, if I decided that I wanted to add a column to all of the content types for whatever reason, then I could just add it here, and I have that inheritance that takes it all the way down to the bottom level. So I do this almost every time I build build a set of content types in a tenant or in a site. I don't always need that flexibility down the road, but it's just a tiny little bit of extra work, and it sets you up for some real ease of use down the road. I learned that over quite a few years ago because I actually had something like, I don't know, 30 content types, and we decided that we needed to add a column to all 30 of them. And I didn't know how to do PowerShell then, and I didn't know how to automate things very well. So I ended up going through all 30 of them and adding that column. It was a real pain in the neck. So I've started doing this not that long afterwards, and I think it's just a good, better practice in case it's something comes along. And then, of course, that underscore naming is also something that I learned over the years. It just makes it so much easier to find the stuff. If you create your own custom content type and you don't give it a special name, it ends up in a group right around in here called custom content types, which isn't always that hard to find, but I find this is just much easier. All right, that's a little bit too much editorial. So I've got this site. I've worked back and forth with my client contact, and now we believe that we've got the right structure for us to start stamping out some additional sites. So the first thing that I do is I go into Visual Studio Code. This is where I go if I want to run PowerShell. And I've got a PowerShell script here. And by the way, all of these scripts are available in a GitHub repo, so you'll be able to grab this stuff if you want it later. So no need to take pictures of the screen or whatever. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for the video. So we've got, and don't worry about that red, that's just an error loading something. So we've got some basic PowerShell that's just going to connect to the template site, so information architecture. Actually, that's not true. We're gonna connect to the admin site. It's because we're a SharePoint admin, so we want to connect to the root admin site. I've got a couple of utility functions in this library that I'm loading just so that I can use them down below. I create myself a class called list. This is a little bit of overkill in PowerShell, but the nice thing here is now I can create myself an array of lists. And I've said that what I want to do is I want to export a site script from documents. I want to export the site script from property. In reality, in the instance where I was working with this particular property list, I had, I think, 5 or 6 different lists and libraries that I wanted to export. So for each L in lists, I export the site script from lists. That's one of the functions that I have in my module up here. And I'm passing in a template site URL and the list name. Okay? So I just need to be connected to the admin center URL in order for the permissioning to work. Okay, so when I run this, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with both of those site scripts exported. And I actually had to reboot in the middle there. There was a little bit of a break. I had a couple of hiccups, of course, because that's the way demos go. So I just said that I want to export shared documents and I want to export property. Okay, and you'll notice I have a couple of messages in my library that says what I'm doing. I'm exporting the list shared documents in that particular site, exporting property in that particular site. So what I end up with is these 2 JSON files, and each one describes what the setup is for that particular library. Shared Documents is one of the out-of-the-box libraries. You're very familiar with it, I'm sure. And you'll notice that what I end up with in this JSON file is a set of, there's a schema, and the schema is actually something that's very clearly defined. And there's an article that covers that quite well. It's called Site Design JSON Schema. It's in that docs.microsoft.com location. And it basically explains all of the things that you can do with a site design and how you can do it. So for instance, if I want to create a list, I use the verb create sp list. So now if we go back to what I've exported, you'll notice that I'm using the verb create sp list, and I'm giving it a name called documents. The template is 101, which is the base template for a document library. And then in the sub-actions, we're doing some various things to the list in order to turn it into the library that is shared documents. One of the downsides of exporting a site script like this is that you end up with some things that you actually don't need to do. That shared documents library is about as vanilla a document library as it can possibly be, so I don't actually need to add these SP fields, which is sort of the coding way to say add columns, like the shortcut URL, the shortcut site URL ID. Those things are not things that I need to do as somebody who's building a site design. So there's a bunch of stuff that sort of ends up in this site script that I don't really need. But I do want to then add a view that looks like this. And by the way, that's the out-of-the-box view. But it's a good way to start a view if you wanted to build one on your own. These are the query specifics for that particular view, and then we're done. Okay, so this is my starting point. I export what's already there, and then I can make some changes and turn it into a site design. But let's look at my property list. So there's a site column XML that I'm adding. I'm adding inspection date. The reason this is creating a site column using XML is this is a complicated field description. So all of that XML that's stored in there defines all of the settings that are there for a date time column. The second one is an inspection type, and that's all of the complicated stuff that's in there for the complex type that's a taxonomy field type, which is what a managed metadata term set is all about. Then I create a content type. That's some of the magic, right? So I've created 2 site columns. I'm creating a content type, my demo base document. Even though I don't have that applied to the list, the site script, the export knows that this is a dependency that I have in order to use my inspection report down here. Okay, so it knows that I need the demo base document, so I can inherit from that for demo base property document, and then I can inherit from that for inspection report. I add those 2 columns to the inspection report. The important thing here is for the reason we're doing a site design is we can't just go into different sites and create inspection report content types, because this ID has to be the same in every site for SharePoint to understand that this content type is the same content type that's in other sites. If I just went in and created a content type in another site called inspection report, it would actually have a different ID. It's a system generated ID, and every time you create something new, you get a different ID, and therefore SharePoint would think it was a different thing. Then I create these other content types, floor plan. Actually, that's the only other one that I have applied. Then I create an SP list called property. I add the content type document. Well, I actually don't add it, it's already there. But one of the nice things about site designs and PNP provisioning templates is they're what's called idempotent. So even though I'm asking for it to do something that isn't necessary to do, it's just going to skip that if it's already there. I'm adding the content type inspection report, floor plan, and then you'll notice there's some more of this stuff that I really don't need to do. When you get sort of good at this after you've done it for a while, you realize which things you need and which things you don't. I'm adding a view, and you notice in that view I'm displaying inspection date and an inspection type, and pretty much everything else is the same, except for second view, which is by content type, which is something that you can't do easily through the UI, so it's nice to be able to add this in your site design, and then I'm done. Okay, so what I do with those exports is I actually copy them into a separate folder and edit them down into my site scripts. So I always have my exports available in case I need to go and copy and paste something from them, but I sort of skinny down the site script and remove that stuff that I didn't need to do. So if you remember, when I created this content type, or I'm sorry, when I created this list, it was adding a bunch of columns to it that I just don't need to add. They're already there. They're under the covers. So this is the sort of skinny down version of the property JSON the property site script. So this is a site script. And then I have another site script that just adds that property database, or sorry, property library to the navigation. So add nav link is the verb, and I'm adding the URL /property. It's a relative link, and I call it property, and I say its parent is going to be documents. You'll notice that in the site that where I've got this going on, I actually have documents, and then property is nested underneath it. I actually find a lot of my clients find this logical, even though documents is a location and you can click on it. You might find out that your mileage will vary on that one. So I've got two site scripts, the property and the demo base. And in order to turn them into a site design, I sort of have to crunch them together. So in my site design script, I'm also sort of building up a class called site script. I'm first instantiating the property site script, and then I'm going to do them in this order. I'm going to instantiate the property site script and then that demo base one, because the property URL can't be added to the navigation until that property library actually exists. And so for each one of those site scripts, I get its ID, and then I pass the array of IDs into this add site design function, which is defined in my library, and bundle them together into a site design that I'm giving the name demo base. So if I run this, it's going to take those two site scripts, again, sort of bundle them together. You notice it's registering those two site scripts with SharePoint, and then it registers the site design called demo base. One of the reasons I built that little library, which I'm using here, my utility functions, is it's not that simple to sort of figure out, well, does this site script already exist, and if it does, then update it. Instead, you end up sort of recreating it, and you end up with lots of duplicates. So my little functions in that library make it a little bit smarter, and makes that registering a little bit more straightforward. If it already exists, it replaces it or updates it, really, and if it doesn't exist yet, it just registers it for the first time. I won't go through those utility functions, but that's why I'm using them. So now that I've done that, when I go back to my site, now this is my information architecture site, but if I go and look at the site designs, you can see I've already applied this demo base thing here a bunch of times. And if I look at the available site scripts, I have a couple others, or at least one other that I've been playing around with, but I have this site script called demo base. And if I look at this, you'll see that it's actually doing the things that are shown in the verbs in those site scripts. So remember, I had the property one first, which is that section, and then the other sort of the base one for the property site is just adding the property to the site nav. So just that last step. So when we look at one of these site designs and decide to apply it to a site, this is what it's going to do. Now, I'm not going to apply it to the information architecture site because I already have that site. That's where I had all that set up in the first place. Instead, I'm going to go, and actually I'll do this in the SharePoint homepage. You may or may not have the permissions to do this in your SharePoint homepage, but there's my create site, and I'm going to create a team site, and then I'm going to choose which site design I want to apply to that site. So in this case, I'm going to do it right here. I'm going to give it a name, test 777, to keep it unique, and then I'm going to say next. What's going to happen here is it's going to create that team site, an out-of-the-box team site, and then you'll notice it says applying the site design, updating the site based on the design you choose. And if you want to see what it's doing, you can see that screen that I was looking at before. Now you notice it's gone through this very, very quickly. I do think they've done some work on site designs to make this faster, because it used to take a lot longer to run these. But it just sort of runs through these steps, looking at the verbs and the actions, and then applying those to the site. I view the updated site, and there is my property library, and you notice there's my inspection date, inspection type, And that's all there is to it, to crank out a new site that has that particular site design applied to it. The other nice thing about site designs is, say I made some changes to that site design. You can see right here I've applied it today, 9/14. At least here in the US it's still 9/14. Where you are it's 9/15. And I can look at the available site designs and I can apply that again. Remember that idempotent property. If I apply the same one again, it's going to end up with exactly the same result. So if I've made a change to that particular site design and I apply it to the site again, it's only going to make the changes that I've added to the site design. It's not going to break anything that's already there. Site designs are also generally not destructive. So you, for instance, can't delete a library. You can't really cause too much trouble other than a couple of specific sub-actions like removing a content type from a library. So for instance, if I didn't want that document content type to be available in that properties library, I could remove it in the site design. But as you saw, that ran really fast, and now I'm back and everything's the same as it was before. So that's how a site design works. So again, just to review a little bit about what we're seeing here, the process I went through is I created a site, the information architecture site. I set up a library with the right content types on it, and again, those content types are defined on the site level, and then they're enabled on the list. I did an export of the site scripts from the individual libraries. I like to keep my site scripts rather separate. You know, don't try and make a site script do too much. You can actually export a site script for an entire site, but I find that that's too much. There's too much in it, and then I can't mix and match. You know, I might want to have a site script or a site design that only has this in it, or a site design that only has that in it. I can also apply multiple site designs to a site, by the way. There's nothing to stop me from doing that, and they may do different things for me. So I export, I take a look at what those exports look like. I make a copy of them just so I have the originals. I edit them down, make some changes. I created this demo base one so I could add something to the navigation. I could have, like I said, exported the entire site, and this little clause would have been in there, but here I just created it myself. And then I instantiate or register the site scripts with SharePoint, and then register the site design with SharePoint to have those two site scripts in it. You can have, I think it's up to 30 site scripts in any one site design. So there's a lot of different ways you can mix and match and get things to work together. So that's site scripts. Now that you've seen how site scripts work, PNP provisioning templates are actually going to make some sense as well. So let me pause here and just swap some code. Okay. For the PNP provisioning template, I'm going to use the same source site. So I've still got my information architecture site. I've got the documents, the property library underneath documents. But notice that the home page here is pretty blah, right? There's nothing special about it. So let's go back to code. So I've got a separate project here. There are two projects that are in my demo repository that you can take a look at. There's a site scripts one and a PNP provisioning one. This one is the latter. So here, same basic idea. Okay, we're gonna take that site that we created as a prototype. We're gonna do an export from it, and then we're gonna maybe do some editing of what that export is in order to create a nice clean template, maybe add some parameterization into it, and then apply that PNP provisioning template to a specific site. So this is the export piece, get PNP provisioning template. It's same kind of connection stuff. I'm connecting to that template site URL, and then I'm getting the PNP provisioning template. I'm using a configuration which I like. It's the piece of JSON that you might want to use with these PNP provisioning templates. In this JSON, I'm actually setting up, what do I want it to export? I don't have to export everything that's going on in that site. So I know that I want to change some of the web settings, some of the things that are about the web itself. That's site to end users. I want to change some navigation stuff. I want to create some fields. That's another name for site columns. I want to create some content types. I want to create some lists. And in this case, I also want to create a page. So those are the handlers that I'm asking for. And then I have some settings for each of those handlers. Which of the lists do I want to do something with? Which of the content types do I want based on which group they're in? Finally, a use for content type groups other than just to make that content type management page a little bit more constructive. So this sort of says to the engine, when I say get the P&P provisioning template, only get me this stuff. So I might just want the navigation. I might just want the list. I can sort of make it very targeted so that I only get the stuff that I want. So when I run get P&P provisioning template, I pass in that configuration file, and then I say this is out. This is where do I want the export to go, and force is just in case there's already one sitting there. I want to overwrite it. So when I run this, again, it's a relatively quick process. Famous final words, right? With the P&P provisioning templates, you get this nice sort of, in PowerShell, it's a little bit of a UI that shows you what's going on. And if you watch down there, you'll see now it's doing the list instances, and it's working on the property list. There it's looking at the page contents, it's looking at the content types, it's looking at the navigation, and now it's done. Okay, and what I've ended up with, you notice that this file changed color a little bit because in Visual Studio Code it keeps track of, I've got it under change management, I'm using Git repository, so it knows that this file has changed. And you notice I named it raw because this is what comes out raw from exporting the template. Now this is XML, and if you start looking through here, you may very easily get intimidated fast. I'm going to try and show you that it's not as scary as it seems. XML is it has a nested aspect to it, so you can store lots and lots of layers of information. Same thing with that JSON. You notice that there were sections of it that had subsections and subsections and subsections. So if I collapse all this stuff down, you'll notice that it's not as scary as you thought. Here are some settings for the web. Here's the navigation settings. The site fields, so those are actually the site columns I'm creating. The content types, the lists, and that's all that all that I asked it to export, right? And then within each one of these sections, you see the the specifics of what it is that is going on inside that particular site and how we can reinstantiate it. Now I've done the same kind of thing. That raw was there so that I would know that that's the export coming straight out of the export process. But I have a slightly cleaned up version that is what I'm going to actually apply to new sites. Now you notice I talked a couple times about the parameterization that we can do here. So one of the web settings I can do is what's the title of the site, and I can pass in here I'm passing in a parameter called site title, and that's going to become the title of the site. And these little squiggly brackets is how we sort of indicate that we've got a parameter that we want the engine to replace and use a different value for. You'll notice here in the navigation section, I'm adding this property link inside the navigation node for documents, so same effect. Down here I'm adding some site fields. And again, it's going to look really scary, but don't worry about it. It's just the XML that we saw in that site design or site script export. So we're going to do an inspection type. It's a taxonomy field. It points to a managed metadata term store, and it's got a bunch of stuff there that you really don't need to pay attention to, but you know it's right because we just exported it. There's an inspection date. Again, with some settings that we don't need to worry about too much. And then finally there's the lists, sorry, not finally. So there's me creating the property list. I'm adding these content types to it. These are by ID, so I don't know what the names of those things are, but I know what they are because I have them defined in the site. I'm setting the view. Here's a view here, and here are the fields that I want in it. It's all very similar to what was in that JSON for the site script. It's just stored in in XML instead. So again, finally down at the bottom, after I do all of that, I've added in a client-side page, and I'm actually, in this case, changing the home page, and I'm adding a couple of web parts to the home page. It's a little bit hard to see what's going on here unless you parse through all of it. But I've got some parameters that I'm setting inside all of this encoded XML. Trust me, it'll work. So what I can do then, that's again, I get it to do the export, and then I apply it to a site that I've already created. What I actually have done here is this is a sort of an adaptation of something that I wrote to help that property management company build their sites on demand. But basically, here I'm gonna create a new project site, or it's actually property site. That should be property. I'm gonna call it Demo Adelaide, so that you know I don't have anything up my sleeve. And I probably spelled that wrong. Yeah, I did. And I'm going to use in the real case, I had a property code, and that becomes the alias, the /site/ whatever. So I'm going to say AUS, and so I'm going to give myself a little bit of a message here. I'm just going to run pieces of this. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to create an Adelaide site, and I'm going to give it the name AUS, so the URL AUS. I'm using new PNP site, which will actually, well, I did something wrong here. Object reference, oh, I forgot to connect. So I'm going to connect up here. I am going to do the new PNP site. So this is just going to create a new site, and it's going to be at /site/AUS, and I will show you that to prove that it's true. /site/AUS, and there it is, Demo Adelaide. You remember I passed in the site title, and so it's created the site with that site title. Site creation is so much faster these days. It doesn't have that property library yet because I haven't applied the template. All I've done is created a new site using PowerShell. Now I have that new site, so I connect to it. Here are my parameters, and I'll run that just to show you what the parameters are. Oh, it's still creating the site, sorry. We're going to just do a little bit of a pause here. Okay, I was always a little premature when I do my demos. So now I'm going to connect to that new site, and I'm going to set up the parameters that I'm going to use to create it. So that's just going to take a second. Unauthorized. So now I'm connected to that site. Sorry about the error message. And you'll notice I've got these params. So params, this is what I am passing into the function. So I'm going to give it the site title, Demo Adelaide. The property code is AUS. We knew that. And then if I wanted to connect it to a hub site, I can do that, which is sort of slick. And in fact, I do want to do that, so I'm fixing that value. This is what happens when I sort of cherry pick my lines of code. I'm doing things in bits and pieces. So they're my parameters. So I'm going to connect to that hub site called properties. Okay. And then the final line here that really does the work is apply the PNP provisioning template. I'm going to use the connection that I just created up here to that new site. So it's that AUS site. I'm going to use the provisioning template that's at this path, which is the one that we were looking at a little bit earlier, and then I'm going to pass in the parameters that I've shown you down here. So while I do that, it's going to take a few minutes probably, but you'll notice that it gives me that sort of blue and yellow overview of what's going on. So it's creating some content, some fields, it's creating the content types, it's going to create the lists, it's going to work on that home page. And let me just go back to show you this. is still the home page that comes out of the box with the team site, so nothing special. As this thing runs, and it's going to take a few minutes, but I'll sort of keep talking. It's going to create the list instances. There goes the property list. That will be done in a second. And you'll notice that it sort of bops around back and forth between lists and content types and things like that. I think it's a function of making sure that the dependencies work correctly. It just applied the content types to that list. Now it's checking some more things about the list. Almost done, 73%. So it's finishing up that property list, adding the 2 views. Now it's adding the client-side page. It's editing, or it's actually making the changes I've asked for to the home page. It's adding the navigation, and now it's done. So it was pretty quick. So now when I refresh this page, you'll notice that it will change. Yep, so now it's got some document libraries listed here as quick links. It's actually tried to add a planner here, which doesn't exist because I hadn't created it yet. It made sure that the activities web part is down there. So you noticed it actually changed the default home page. And then of course the property library is there, and it's got the columns that you would expect. So it takes me a little bit further, and of course I can do more than what I'm doing here, but you know, if I had a set of document libraries that I wanted to use here as quick links, you can discuss amongst yourselves whether we need these as quick links or we can just use this here. But you know, I did it to show that we can add a whole set of quick links and change their icons and all sorts of other stuff that makes the home page work for a property site. And then notice that you have the hub site navigation up here. I've connected to that properties hub site, and I've got the all-important CNN link to make sure I watch the news. So that is, I think, the whole set of demo that I wanted to do. Again, these 2 projects are available on my demo site. Let me just hop back over to the slides, and I just want to say thank you again for having me. And I actually have this on the wrong screen, but that's okay, it doesn't really matter. So thanks again for having me. There are some links here that are some things that I went over. The Microsoft 365 Community Docs, Microsoft 365 Patterns and Practices site, which shows all of the P&P projects. And then here's the link, simpmark.news/demos will show you the site designs and P&P provisioning templates that I just took you through. I want to thank Daniel for inviting me, and if you want a copy of these slides, I will have gotten them to Daniel along with the video, and you are welcome to use them however you see fit. Thanks again for the time, and I wish I could have been with you, but I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear back what you think, what questions you have. I'd be happy to answer them through Daniel or through email or whatever. So please let me know what you think and if you have questions, and I hope I will see you in person sometime soon. Thanks.